Hello and welcome to Tales from the Hangman's Record. Today's case takes us back to the summer of 1930. King George V is on the throne and a Labour-Liberal coalition government in power, with Ramsay MacDonald serving his second term as Prime Minister. In America, the Wall Street crash has wiped millions off the stock exchange and brought to an end the Roaring Twenties. Economically, the country is in a mess, with unemployment recorded at over 2 million by the August of 1930. And with little in the way of benefits, many families were on the breadline and living in dire poverty. In Parliament, a debate took place looking at capital punishment and whether to abolish or reform the death penalty. As a result, there was an unusually high number of reprieves issued and only 4 executions carried out in the United Kingdom, the lowest since the abolition of public executions in 1868. It was against its austerity and uncertain times that a landmark case took place that would pass into criminal law. It was the first time in a British court someone was convicted and sentenced despite not being present when the murder actually took place. So, sit back and enjoy the video. The job had been carefully planned. They had watched a number of times as the man went about his regular routine of walking to the National Provisional Bank, and when his appearance could be anticipated almost to the minute, they decided it was time to put their plan into action. 63-year-old William Thomas Andrews had worked for Taylor & Sons Drapers of Potter's Hill, Aston, Birmingham, in the West Midlands of England for over 30 years, since the days of Queen Victoria, and had risen to the position of head porter. One of his duties was to see that the wages were collected and takings deposited at the nearby Six Ways branch of the bank on a daily basis. At just after 2 o'clock on Monday afternoon, the 21st of July 1930, Andrews collected a bag with the weekend's takings of just over £900, along with the pay-in book, and set out on the 5-minute walk to the branch. It was a journey he would never complete. Early that same afternoon, 2 21-year-olds, Victor Betts and Herbert Ridley, had called into Rose Garage on Park Road and arranged to hire a yellow Morris Cowley 4-seater saloon, telling the proprietor they wanted it for an hour or so to take elderly relatives for a drive across the city. They agreed on a price and Ridley signed the hire agreement. It had been Victor Betts who had hit upon the idea of robbing William Andrews. He was unemployed and eking out a meagre living as a street gambler and petty thief when he noticed Andrews carrying the bag of money to the bank. When he saw him a second and then a third time over the coming days, he discussed his plans with a number of criminally inclined associates before settling on lorry driver Bert Ridley, the only one of his friends who could drive. This was an essential part of his plan. That afternoon, with Ridley at the wheel of the hire car, they parked up on the corner of Victoria Road and Rifle Crescent, adjacent to the bank, and waited. When Betts saw Andrew approach, he climbed out and hid around the corner. As the man passed him, Betts struck him on the head and pushed him to the ground. He then snatched the bag, and as the car screeched up alongside, he tossed it into the back and climbed into the front seat as Ridley sped away. A van driver making his way down Victoria Road saw the attack, and at the same moment the yellow car pulled up and the assailant climbed in. As it sped off, he attempted to give chase, but soon lost it as it reached the Six Ways junction. The driver was able to give a good description of the car, and it was quickly traced to Rose Garage, where detectives learned it had been hired by Bert Ridley. Officers hurried to his lodgings on nearby Burton Street, but found he'd already fled. The hire car was later found abandoned a couple of miles away in the Netchels district, the money bag lying empty on the back seat. With Andrews lying in Birmingham General Hospital with a fractured skull, a hunt for his attackers began. Detectives had by now also learned the identity of Ridley's accomplice, and the hunt became a murder inquiry when Andrews died from his injuries 3 days later. He never regained consciousness. It was to be almost 2 weeks before detectives had Betts and Ridley in custody. After leaving the Midlands, the two first headed to Leeds, then made their way down south where, using the stolen money, they purchased a car. They took lodgings in Chichester and made frequent visits to Goodwood and Brighton races. Over the next few days, the two men hooked up with two young girls, May Norris and Beatrice Stone, on holiday from Bristol. Ridley, despite having a wife and young son, quickly became infatuated with May Norris and began to shower her with expensive presents, including a gold watch and a diamond ring. As the hunt for the killers made the headlines in the national papers, the four spent the week together, mostly in and around Brighton, splashing out on food and drink, and also taking a flight in an aeroplane and a ride in a speedboat. On Sunday, 6th of August, the car was involved in an accident. There were four people in the vehicle, Vic Betts, Bert Ridley and the two girls, when it ran into a ditch. Although no one was badly injured, the police were involved, and when officers later went to follow up the incident at an address the men had given, they found a link with the murder in Birmingham. The murder inquiry now focused on the south coast, and after reading reports in the press, the landlady at the Chichester lodgings told police she suspected her guests were the wanted criminals. She travelled to Brighton to assist detectives, and after spotting Ridley on the seafront on Tuesday night, he was placed under arrest. When searched, he was found to be carrying over £150 in cash. Victor Betts was also picked up later that night. Officers went to their new lodgings on Grand Parade, and searching the rooms they found another £250. Taken into custody and then brought back to Birmingham, both admitted being involved in the robbery, but from the outset, Ridley maintained he had merely driven the getaway car and was not involved in the actual assault and robbery. Despite this claim, both were charged with murder and remanded in custody pending their trial. Both men penned a handwritten note stating their innocence, pleading poverty and requesting legal aid for the forthcoming court appearances. The two men appeared in the dock at Birmingham Assizes on Saturday the 4th of December. They were among 20 cases being tried, shared between Mr Justice Hawke and Commissioner Mitchell Innes. Betts and Ridley appeared before the latter. Henry Maddox's KC led for the Crown and claimed the two men had committed murder during the course of a brutal attack on an innocent man going about his business. Evidence was heard that the injuries sustained had been caused by a weapon, such as a hammer or a tyre lever. In the case of Ridley, his defence again maintained he had only been the driver of the car. He said that when they planned the robbery, Betts had told him he simply planned to push Andrews to the ground and snatch the bag. Ridley claimed that had he known Betts intended to use violence, he would have taken no part in the crime. Betts' defence was that he had not intended to kill and therefore was only guilty of manslaughter. Whilst admitting his part in the attack, Betts said he had used minimal force and that he had merely punched the man in the head, and his counsel called medical evidence to show that Andrews had an abnormally thin skull. Betts strenuously denied using any kind of weapon. In his summing up, the judge said that both had undertaken the attack, and while Ridley may have claimed he merely acted as a driver and had not participated in the actual attack, he had been a willing accomplice and had received an equal share of the spoils. Having considered their verdict, the jury needed less than 1 hour to find Betts guilty of murder, and, as Ridley had been party to the common design, they found him equally guilty. There was no recommendation for mercy. Both were sentenced to death, with Ridley almost collapsing in the dock as the black cap was draped over the judge's wig. They were taken to the condemned cells at Birmingham's Winson Green Jail to await execution, and from where each immediately launched an appeal. The partners in crime would not hang side by side. Although preparations were well underway for what would be a rare double hanging at the jail scheduled to take place on the 23rd of December 1930. With debates in Parliament that summer over the possible abolition of the death penalty, it would be the first execution in Great Britain since Albert Marjoram was hanged in Wandsworth in June for the murder of a young girl on Dartford Heath. We looked at this case in episode 25 of Tales from the Hangman's Record. The appeals were heard on the 19th of December before a panel consisting of Mr Justices Avery, Swift and Charles. The evidence was recapped, with lawyers for the two appellants seeking to have the judgment reduced to manslaughter. After a patient hearing, the judges merely concurred with the original verdict and dismissed the appeals. They did, however, add a proviso to the Home Secretary John Clines to consider Ridley more favourably. Despite this, Betts and Ridley were returned to Birmingham jail and a new date of execution fixed. The two spent Christmas in the condemned cells and were visited daily by their family over the holidays, with both said to be bearing up well as campaigns and petitions for their reprieves were underway. Then, on New Year's Eve, just a matter of days before the sentences were due to be carried out, the governor at Winson Green entered Ridley's cell and informed him he had been granted a reprieve. It was felt that the secondary part he played in the attack had warranted the appeal court's suggestion and the Home Office's intervention. He asked about his partner in crime and was told that in his case there was to be no reprieve. Ridley's wife gave an interview to the Thomson Weekly News, stating that Ridley had said if he was being saved, he hoped that Betts' life would also be spared too. There was to be no mercy for Victor Betts, deemed to be the mastermind behind the crime and the man who had wielded the fatal blow. In a last visit with his parents, he lamented his situation, blaming the depression of the 1920s and his ability to find steady work that led to a life of crime and his current fate. At 8 o'clock on a frosty, foggy Saturday morning, the 3rd of January 1931, Victor Betts walked to the newly modernised gallows housed on C Wing of the jail. Tom Pierpoint carried out the execution, his third of 11 visits to Birmingham prison. Pierpoint was assisted by Alfred Allen of Wolverhampton, participating in just his second hanging since he ignominiously fell through the trapdoors at Swansea on his first execution in December 1928. Betts was given a long drop of 7 foot 10 inches and death was reported to be instant. A coroner's inquest found that death was as sanctioned by law and burial in the unconsecrated prison grounds was authorised. Spurred the gallows, Herbert Charles Ridley was sentenced to life imprisonment, but would serve just 5 years before being released on licence in December 1935. He was soon to find himself in trouble again when he was charged with stealing cigarettes from a vending machine and recalled back to prison in 1937. This wasn't to be the end of his brushes with the law, and in 1940 he again found himself in court on 3 charges of housebreaking. Recalled to prison for this offence, following release he would face further terms of imprisonment. In a letter from his probation worker, he noted that Ridley was little more than a waster, unable to hold down a proper job and disowned by his parents and his wife. He was advised to move away from Birmingham, where his reputation as a troublemaker and convicted murderer made it hard for him to settle and find a steady job. He was finally released on licence in August 1946, and it is believed he died in 1982. Following his murder, the family of William Andrews had been fortunate to benefit from an insurance policy issued by the Birmingham Gazette as a registered reader of the newspaper. His son was presented with a cheque for £100, worth almost £8,000 in 2023. Victor Betts was the only man Commissioner Mitchell Innes sent to the gallows. Along with serving as a recorder for Leeds, Edward Mitchell Innes also became the chairman of the General Council of the Bar a few months after Betts was hanged, but he died in March 1932 at the age of 69. There was one final court hearing regarding this case in early 1931, when the property and gifts purchased by the two men whilst on the run were reclaimed from the girl at Bristol, and also the car Betts had purchased. Along with the money found on the men when arrested, it was all later returned to Taylor and Sons. Thank you for watching this video. If you have enjoyed it, can you please press like, and if you don't already, can I ask you to subscribe to the channel. Check out my website stevefielding.com, where you can find information on all my books and order copies of the Hangman's Record series and my 2 new paperbacks from the online shop. You can also find links to the other videos in this series here too. Also check out my podcast channels, Tales from the Hangman's Record and Mostly Murder, which will feature cases not covered in the scope of the Hangman's Record. Do you agree that justice was done in this case? Use the comments below for your thoughts and suggestions for other cases to feature in the Tales from the Hangman's Record series. So until the next time, goodbye.